The sledgehammer hit the basement wall of 412 Maple Street with a dull thud that echoed through the cramped space like a funeral bell. Sarah Chun, the new homeowner, had been told the previous owners were eccentric, but nothing had prepared her for what lay behind that seemingly innocent drywall. As chunks of plaster crumbled away, a smell hit her first. Sweet, cloying, wrong. Then her flashlight beam caught something that made her stumble backward, phone already dialing 911 with trembling fingers. Behind that wall, preserved in the cold darkness for 36 years, were 6 Girl Scout badges still pinned to rotting green fabric. 6 bright smiles stared back from a carefully arranged collection of school photos. And beneath them, in a child's careful handwriting on faded paper, "Please tell our moms we tried to run." The Willowbrook Troop 847 had finally been found. If you're into cinematic true crime stories based on real-life disappearances and cold cases finally cracked, subscribe now and tap the bell icon. Detective Marcus Webb had seen his share of crime scenes, but nothing quite like the basement of 412 Maple Street. The house sat at the end of a dead-end road in Willowbrook, Connecticut, a town of 8,000 people where everybody knew everybody, and secrets were supposed to be impossible to keep. Yet somehow, for 36 years, this particular secret had stayed buried behind a wall of drywall and lies. The FBI evidence response team had arrived within hours, their white hazmat suits moving through the basement like ghosts. Webb stood in the backyard, watching them work through the basement windows, his coffee growing cold in his hands. He'd been 12 years old when Troop 847 disappeared. He remembered the search parties, the helicopters, the way his mother had clutched him tighter every night for months afterward. Detective Webb, Agent Lisa Morrison approached him, her face grim beneath the hazmat hood she'd just removed. "We need to talk." The basement told a story that made Webb's stomach churn. Behind that wall, they'd found a space barely 4 feet wide. Not a room, but a tomb. The Girl Scout badges belonged to Emma Rodriguez, Katie Sullivan, Melissa Chong, Jennifer Hayes, Sarah Williams, and Amy Porter. All 11 years old. All members of Troop 847. All gone since March 15, 1988. But the badges weren't the worst discovery. Morrison led Webb to a folding table they'd set up in the backyard, evidence bags arranged with clinical precision. "The preservation is remarkable," she said quietly. "Cold, dry conditions. Almost like a time capsule." She lifted one of the clear bags. "We found this diary. Amy Porter's, according to the name inside." Webb's hands shook as he read the final entry, dated March 15, 1988. The nice man from the big house said he wanted to order cookies for his employees. Lots of cookies. He gave us the address and said to come to the basement door because he had boxes to show us how many he needed. Emma said it seemed weird, but the badges looked real and he knew all about our troop. He said Mrs. Henderson sent us. We should have asked Mrs. Henderson first, but we wanted to win the prize for most cookies sold. I hope Mom isn't too worried. The door locked behind us, and there's no way out. The diary entries went on for 3 more days. Webb set the bag down carefully, his hands trembling. Jesus Christ. There's more. Morrison's voice was barely a whisper. She pulled out another evidence bag, this one containing a composition notebook, its pages yellowed with age. This belongs to someone else entirely. Someone who documented everything. The notebook was filled with dates, times, methodical observations written in careful adult handwriting. It read like a scientific journal, if the subject had been the systematic torture and murder of children. The final entry was dated March 18, 1988. Subject 6 expired at 3:47 a.m. Disposal complete. Sealing chamber. Operation concluded successfully. Webb's radio crackled to life. "Detective Webb, we've got a problem." It was Officer Janet Ross, calling from the station. "Channel 8 News is here asking questions about the FBI presence on Maple Street." "And sir?" "Mrs. Henderson from the Girl Scout Council just walked in. She's asking to speak with you immediately." Morrison and Webb exchanged glances. Mrs. Henderson had been the troop leader 36 years ago. She'd been the one who reported the girls missing when they failed to return from their cookie-selling route. She'd organized the search parties, comforted the families, and eventually moved away when the case went cold. Now she was back. "Tell her we'll be right there," Webb said into his radio. Then, to Morrison, "Any idea who owned this house in 1988? Morrison consulted her tablet. Property records show it belonged to Dr. Richard Blackwood from 1985 to 1991. Sold it to the Patterson family, who lived here until last month when they sold to our current homeowner. Webb felt the blood drain from his face. He knew that name. Everyone in Willowbrook knew that name. Dr. Richard Blackwood had been the town's most respected pediatrician. The Willowbrook police station was a modest brick building that had served the community for 40 years without ever housing a case quite like this one. Webb found Mrs. Henderson in interview room 2, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. At 73, Eleanor Henderson still carried herself with the same no-nonsense authority she'd wielded as a Girl Scout leader. But her eyes held a haunted quality that hadn't been there 36 years ago. "Detective Webb," she said as he entered. "I heard the news on the scanner. Channel 8 is reporting that you found them." Her voice broke slightly. "Is it true? Are they really gone?" Webb took the seat across from her, choosing his words carefully. "Mrs. Henderson, I need to ask you some questions about March 15, 1988. About Troop 847's cookie sales route that day." She nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I've gone over that day 1,000 times in my mind. They were supposed to work the Elmwood Heights subdivision. Nice neighborhood, big houses, good cookie sales. I dropped them off at the corner of Maple and Elm around 2 p.m. They were supposed to call me at 5 p.m. for pickup. Did you give them any specific addresses? Any predetermined stops?" Mrs. Henderson shook her head. "No, that wasn't how we did it. The girls would go door to door, following safety protocols. Always stay together, never go inside a house, always use the front door." She paused, her eyes growing distant. "I taught them to be careful. I thought I taught them to be careful." Webb leaned forward. "Mrs. Henderson, we found Amy Porter's diary. She mentions a man who said you sent them to him. Someone who wanted to order cookies for his employees." The color drained from Mrs. Henderson's face. "I never sent them anywhere specific. That's not. We would never do that. The diary says he knew details about the troop. He had badges that looked real. He knew your name." Mrs. Henderson's hands began to shake. "Detective Webb, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said 36 years ago." She took a shuddering breath. "After the girls disappeared, I got a phone call. Late at night, maybe 3 days after we started searching. A man's voice, very calm, very polite. He said I shouldn't worry anymore about the girls. He said they'd found what they were looking for, and I should tell the police to stop searching so hard." Webb's pen froze above his notepad. "You never reported this?" "I tried, but when I went to the police station the next morning, Chief Morrison, Agent Morrison's father, he said I was obviously distraught and probably imagining things. He said grief could make people hear voices." She looked directly at Webb. "But I know what I heard, and I know that voice." "Whose voice was it?" Mrs. Henderson's whisper was barely audible. "Dr. Blackwood." It was Dr. Blackwood. The room fell silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Webb felt pieces of a horrible puzzle clicking into place. Dr. Richard Blackwood had treated most of the children in Willowbrook. He would have had access to their medical records, their personal information. He would have known their routines, their activities, their families. He would have known exactly which girls belonged to Troop 847. "Mrs. Henderson," Webb said carefully, "why didn't you tell anyone else about this suspicion?" She laughed bitterly. "Tell them what? That the town's most beloved doctor, the man who delivered half the babies in Willowbrook, was somehow involved? Dr. Blackwood was a pillar of the community. He donated to every charity, sponsored the Little League team, even had Girl Scout cookies delivered to his office every year." She paused. "Besides, Chief Morrison made it very clear that I should focus on grieving instead of playing detective." Webb's radio crackled again. "Detective Webb, Agent Morrison needs you back at the scene. Urgent." As Webb stood to leave, Mrs. Henderson grabbed his arm. "Detective, there's one more thing. After Dr. Blackwood moved away in 1991, I used to drive by his old house sometimes, just to see. The Patterson family were good people, but they did extensive renovations when they moved in. Basement, especially. They said the previous owner had left it in terrible condition." "What kind of condition?" "Water damage. Mold. Strange chemical smells that never seemed to go away, no matter how much they cleaned." Her grip tightened on his arm. "They sealed off part of the basement entirely. Said it wasn't worth trying to fix." Webb's blood ran cold. "They sealed it off? Drywall?" Just put up drywall and pretended that part of the basement didn't exist. Webb arrived back at 412 Maple Street to find the FBI evidence response team in a state of controlled chaos. Agent Morrison met him at the property line, her face pale. "We found another room," she said without preamble. "Another room?" "Behind the first sealed wall. The room where we found the girls. That wasn't the end of it. There's a whole network of spaces down there, connected by crawl spaces. And Webb." She paused, looking toward the house. "We found more evidence. A lot more." Morrison led him through the basement, past the first discovery site, to where the team had broken through another wall. This space was larger, more elaborate. The walls were lined with metal shelving units, each shelf carefully labeled with dates going back to 1979. The shelves contained hundreds of items, each in its own clear container. Jewelry, clothing, school ID cards, personal effects. Each container bore a label with a name, date, and age. Webb scanned the labels, his horror growing with each one. Michael Torres, age 10, September 12, 1979. Lisa Wong, age 9, April 3, 1981. Danny Stevens, age 11, October 15, 1983. The collection spanned more than a decade, ending with Troop 847 in 1988. "Jesus," Webb whispered. "How many?" 47 children, Morrison said grimly. "Based on the inventory logs we found. All between ages 8 and 12. All from different towns within a 60-mile radius of Willowbrook." Webb studied the dates more carefully. The frequency increased over time. 1 or 2 children per year in the early years, escalating to 6 or more annually by the mid-1980s. It's like he was perfecting his system. That's not the worst part. Morrison led him to another section of shelving, this one containing bound notebooks. Dr. Blackwood documented everything. Every abduction, every procedure. He treated it like medical research. One of the notebooks lay open on a folding table, its pages protected by clear plastic. Webb read the first entry. Patient exhibits typical fear response patterns. Elevated heart rate, hyperventilation, attempts at bargaining. Interesting to note psychological development stages under extreme duress. The clinical detachment of the writing made Webb's skin crawl. This wasn't the work of a person driven by passion or anger. This was systematic, calculated, cold. "There's more," Morrison continued, leading him to the back corner of the room. "We found video equipment. Professional grade, 1980s technology. And storage containers for film reels." She paused. "The containers are empty, but there are detailed logs of what was recorded." Webb didn't want to know, but he had to ask. "What kind of recordings?" "Everything. The abductions, the confinement, the—" She swallowed hard. "The final moments." He cataloged it all. "And according to these logs, he didn't keep the films here." "Where did he keep them?" Morrison held up a leather-bound ledger. "According to this, he had customers. People who paid for specific types of recordings. Names, addresses, payment amounts. This wasn't just about his own pathology. He was running a business." Webb felt the case expanding beyond anything he'd ever imagined. This wasn't just about one twisted pediatrician in a small Connecticut town. This was about a network, a systematic operation that had been feeding the darkest corners of human depravity for over a decade. His phone buzzed with a text message from Officer Ross. Channel 8 interview request. Also, 3 parents of missing children from surrounding towns just showed up asking about the news reports. What should I tell them? Webb looked around the basement chamber at the evidence of decades of horror hidden beneath this quiet residential street. He thought about the 47 families who had never gotten answers, who had spent years wondering what happened to their children. Soon, they would know. But first, he needed to understand the full scope of what Dr. Blackwood had created. And more importantly, he needed to find out who else was involved. The ledger in Agent Morrison's hands contained 15 names. 15 customers who had paid for recordings of child murder. 15 people who were still out there, still free, still dangerous. Webb's radio crackled. "All units, we have a 911 call from 847 Elmwood Drive. Caller reports suspicious activity in the basement, possible break-in. Requesting immediate response." Morrison checked her tablet. 847 Elmwood Drive. That's Dr. Blackwood's old address. Webb felt his blood turn to ice. Someone had been watching the news reports. Someone knew they were getting close. Someone was trying to destroy evidence. As they raced from the basement toward their vehicles, Webb couldn't shake the feeling that they were dealing with something much larger than one dead doctor's collection of horrors. The systematic nature of the operation, the careful documentation, the customer base, it all suggested something that had been designed to survive beyond Dr. Blackwood himself. Something that might still be active. Something that might still be hunting. The sirens wailed through the quiet streets of Willowbrook as they sped toward Elmwood Drive, but Webb knew they were already too late. Whoever was destroying evidence had probably been planning this moment for 36 years, waiting for the day when the walls would finally come down and the truth would emerge. The only question was, how many more walls were still standing? And what other horrors lay hidden in the darkness, waiting to be discovered? The smoke was visible from 3 blocks away, a black column rising against the darkening sky like a funeral pyre. By the time Webb and Agent Morrison reached 847 Elmwood Drive, the Willowbrook Fire Department was already on scene, their hoses trained on what had once been Dr. Blackwood's basement workshop. The current owners, the Hartley family, stood on their front lawn in robes and slippers, their faces streaked with soot and confusion. Started about 20 minutes ago, Fire Chief Tom Bradley told Webb as they watched the flames consume whatever evidence might have remained. Basement went up like it was soaked in gasoline. The Hartleys said they heard someone downstairs around 6 p.m., but figured it was just the neighbor's cat that sometimes gets in through the old coal chute. Morrison surveyed the scene grimly. Professional job. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were destroying. Webb approached Janet Hartley, the homeowner, who was clutching her young daughter's hand with white knuckles. Mrs. Hartley, did you or your family ever have any interaction with Dr. Blackwood? Any idea what might have been in that basement? Mrs. Hartley shook her head, her voice shaky. We bought the house in 2003, 12 years after he moved away. The basement was just storage space. Old furniture, holiday decorations, that sort of thing. We never really went down there much. She paused, looking at the smoke. Though now that I think about it, there was always this smell. Sweet, chemical-like. Our realtor said it was just old house smell, but it never went away completely. Agent Morrison's phone buzzed. She answered it with a sharp, Morrison, then listened intently for several minutes, her expression growing increasingly dark. When she hung up, she pulled Webb aside. That was the lab, she said quietly. They've been processing the evidence from Maple Street. The customer ledger? It's not just names and addresses. Dr. Blackwood kept detailed records of what each customer wanted, how much they paid, and when deliveries were made. Webb felt his stomach clench. Deliveries, film reels, photographs, audio recordings, and in some cases, Morrison paused, checking to make sure they were out of earshot of the families nearby. Personal items, jewelry, clothing, locks of hair. He was running a full-service operation for pedophiles and murderers. The implications hit Webb like a physical blow. This wasn't just about Dr. Blackwood's personal pathology. It was about a systematic supply chain feeding the darkest appetites of multiple predators. And if the customers were still alive, they would do anything to keep their involvement secret, including burning down buildings full of evidence. Who's on the customer list? Webb asked. Morrison consulted her phone. Names we recognize so far. Judge Harold Whitmore, retired from the Connecticut Superior Court. Pastor David Mills from Sacred Heart Lutheran. Police Chief Robert Morrison. She stopped, her face going pale. Morrison. Webb stared at her. Same last name as you. My father, she whispered. My father was Chief Morrison in 1988, the one who dismissed Mrs. Henderson's concerns. Her hands were shaking now. Jesus Christ, Webb. My own father was one of Blackwood's customers. The revelation hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. If the police chief had been involved in covering up the operation, how many other cases had been suppressed? How many families had been denied justice to protect Dr. Blackwood's network? Webb's radio crackled. Detective Webb, urgent call from state police. They need you at headquarters immediately. Something about matching cases in other jurisdictions. As they drove away from the still-burning house on Elmwood Drive, Morrison remained silent, staring out the window at the familiar streets of the town where she'd grown up. Finally, she spoke. I need to recuse myself from this case. There's no way I can investigate my own father's involvement. No, Webb said firmly. That's exactly why you need to stay. You know this town, you know the players. And right now, You might be the only law enforcement officer in a 100-mile radius who isn't potentially compromised. Morrison considered this. What if there are others? Other cops, other officials who were involved. Then we find them. All of them. The Connecticut State Police headquarters was buzzing with activity when they arrived. Captain Jennifer Walsh met them at the security desk, her expression grim. Detective Webb, Agent Morrison, thank you for coming so quickly. We need to brief you on some developments that changed the scope of this case dramatically. She led them to a conference room where the walls were covered with maps, photographs, and timeline charts. Other investigators sat around a large table, their faces reflecting the same haunted expression Webb had been seeing all day. Agent Morrison, Captain Walsh began. Your discovery at the Maple Street house has opened floodgates we didn't know existed. In the past 6 hours, we've received calls from 12 different police departments across New England, all reporting similar unsolved cases from the 1980s. She gestured to the map, which was covered with red pins. Missing children, all between ages 8 and 12. All disappeared while engaged in innocent activities, selling candy for school fundraisers, walking home from scout meetings, riding bikes in safe neighborhoods. The pattern matches perfectly with Dr. Blackwood's documentation. Detective Ray Santos from the Hartford Police stood up. We've been sitting on cold cases for decades that suddenly make sense. Missing kids whose disappearances never followed normal patterns. No ransom demands, no bodies found, no witnesses, just children who vanished completely. Captain Walsh activated a projector, displaying a photograph of a ledger page. But here's what's really disturbing. According to Dr. Blackwood's records, he wasn't working alone. This was a coordinated network operating across multiple states. He was just one supplier in a larger operation. The ledger page showed shipping addresses in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New York, and Vermont. Customer codes rather than names. Payment amounts that ranged from hundreds to thousands of dollars. And delivery schedules that corresponded exactly with missing children reports from those areas. Agent Morrison leaned forward. How extensive are we talking? Based on the documentation you found, conservative estimate is over 200 children across a 20-year period. Multiple suppliers, dozens of customers, and a distribution network that reached from Boston to Albany. Webb felt the room spinning. They weren't dealing with one monster. They were dealing with an entire industry built on child murder. Detective Santos pulled out a thick folder. Hartford PD has been working a theory for years about systematic child abductions, but we could never prove connection between cases. Different jurisdictions, different time frames, different methods. Now we know why. They were all feeding the same network. Captain Walsh nodded. What's more, the network appears to still be active. We've identified at least 6 children who disappeared in the past 5 years following similar patterns. Same age range, same type of circumstances, same complete disappearance. Morrison's face had gone white. You're saying this thing is still operating? Even after Blackwood died. Dr. Blackwood died in 1994, Captain Walsh confirmed. But his customer base didn't die with him. Someone else took over the operation. She clicked to the next slide, showing a more recent ledger page. This one computer-printed rather than handwritten. We found this in a safety deposit box registered under one of Blackwood's aliases. Transactions dating from 1995 to present day. New supplier codes, but same customer base, same payment structures, same types of merchandise. Webb stared at the dates. Someone's been continuing his work for 30 years. Not just continuing it, Detective Santos said grimly. Expanding it. The recent entries show customers in California, Florida, Texas. This thing has gone national. Captain Walsh pulled up another document. And here's the really terrifying part. The recent customer list includes people in positions of significant power. Federal judges, congressmen, tech executives, entertainment industry figures. People with resources to keep this operation protected at the highest levels. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about bringing justice for past crimes. It was about exposing an active network of child murderers that had been operating with protection from some of the most powerful people in the country. Webb's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Stop digging or join your young friends in the basement. Morrison's phone buzzed at the same moment with an identical message. Captain Walsh's phone was next. Then Detective Santos. Then everyone else in the room. Someone was watching them. Someone knew exactly who was investigating, where they were, and what they had discovered. Someone with the resources to send simultaneous messages to law enforcement officers across multiple jurisdictions. Captain Walsh looked around the room grimly. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we just became targets. The safe house was a nondescript ranch home in Cromwell, Connecticut, 30 miles from Willowbrook. FBI agent David Park had arranged the location within an hour of the threatening messages. But even here, Webb couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. How did they get our phone numbers so quickly? Morrison asked, pacing the small living room. Those are secure law enforcement devices. Agent Park, a cybersecurity specialist, looked up from his laptop. I've been analyzing the message delivery system. Whoever sent these has access to law enforcement databases. Not just local databases, federal systems. This required clearance at a level that suggests someone very high up in the food chain. Webb studied the customer ledger they'd brought from headquarters. Look at these payment amounts. Some of these customers were paying $50,000 or more for individual recordings. That's not hobby money. That's serious wealth. Enough wealth to buy protection, Morrison agreed. Enough wealth to corrupt officials, buy silence, eliminate threats. Agent Park's laptop chimed with an incoming message. His face went pale as he read it. We've got a problem. I've been monitoring chatter on dark web forums since this morning, trying to track communications about the Willowbrook discovery. Someone just posted a bounty. A bounty. $500,000 for information leading to the location of the investigators who found the basement. Another $2 million for permanent elimination of same. Webb felt ice water flood his veins. Professional killers would be mobilizing within hours for those kinds of numbers. Morrison's phone rang. She answered it cautiously. Agent Morrison. The voice on the other end was distorted, electronically altered, but clear enough to understand. Agent Morrison. Detective Webb. Agent Park. You're in a ranch house in Cromwell. Blue sedan in the driveway. Kitchen light is on. Morrison's hand moved instinctively to her weapon. Who is this? Someone who knew your father very well. Robert Morrison was one of our best customers. Paid premium prices for our specialty recordings. Would hate to see his daughter meet the same fate as the children in those films. You son of a... The network you've stumbled onto has been operating successfully for 45 years. We've survived investigations before. We've eliminated investigators before. This can end one of two ways. You can walk away and forget what you've seen, or you can join our collection. The line went dead. Agent Park was already shutting down his laptop. We need to move. Now, if they know our location, we've got maybe minutes before this place is compromised. As they gathered their evidence and prepared to evacuate, Morrison grabbed Webb's arm. There's something else. Something I didn't tell you earlier. She pulled out a photograph from her jacket. A family photo showing a man in police uniform with a woman and young girl. This is my father with me and my mother in 1987. But look at the background. Webb studied the photo. They were standing in front of a large house with distinctive stone pillars and a wraparound porch. Where was this taken? 412 Maple Street. Dr. Blackwood's house. My family was invited to some kind of dinner party there, just a few months before Troop 847 disappeared. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Morrison's father hadn't just been a customer. He'd been an active participant in the planning phase. He'd known what was going to happen to those girls. Car doors slammed outside. Multiple vehicles, engines left running. Agent Park drew his weapon. Back exit. Now, as they slipped through the rear door into the dark backyard, Webb could hear voices coordinating around the house. Professional voices. Military cadence. These weren't street thugs. They were operators. The network Dr. Blackwood had created 40 years ago had evolved into something far more sophisticated and infinitely more dangerous. And now it was hunting them. They made it to the tree line just as the first explosion shattered the quiet Connecticut night. The safe house erupted in flames behind them, just like Dr. Blackwood's basement had hours earlier. But this time, they could hear screaming. Morrison grabbed Webb's arm as they ran through the woods. Those screams, they're not coming from the house. She was right. The screaming was coming from somewhere deeper in the woods, carried on the night wind like a chorus of the damned. Somewhere nearby, the network's current operation was in progress. Somewhere close, children were dying. And their investigation had just become a rescue mission. Agent Park's GPS showed an abandoned summer camp half a mile north of their position. Camp Wildwood, closed since 1989. According to the satellite imagery, the buildings were still standing. According to the screams echoing through the trees, they weren't empty. Webb checked his weapon and started moving toward the sound. Behind him, Morrison and Park followed, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights hunting for monsters. They were about to find more monsters than they'd bargained for. But first, they were about to discover that the network's current operation made Dr. Blackwood's basement chamber look like amateur hour. What waited for them at Camp Wildwood would redefine their understanding of organized evil entirely. The screams led them through a maze of overgrown hiking trails to the edge of Camp Wildwood's main compound. What they found there would haunt Webb for the rest of his life. The camp hadn't been abandoned at all. Hidden beneath decades of deliberate neglect, someone had transformed the facility into a sophisticated production studio. Portable generators hummed quietly behind camouflaged barriers. Professional lighting equipment cast harsh shadows through cabin windows. And in the center of it all, a large cabin had been converted into what could only be described as a broadcast center. Multiple vehicles were parked in a clearing that had been carefully concealed from aerial surveillance. Black SUVs, a panel van with New York plates, and a medical transport vehicle that made Webb's blood run cold. Agent Park checked his phone. No cell signal. They're jamming communications. Morrison pointed toward the largest cabin. The screaming stopped. Either they're done, or they know we're here, Webb finished. Through the trees, they could see figures moving between buildings with military precision. At least 6 individuals, all armed, all coordinating through what appeared to be military-grade communication equipment. But it was the sounds coming from the broadcast cabin that made Morrison grab Webb's arm. Not screaming now, but something worse. The clinical voices of people providing commentary for an audience. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's featured presentation will showcase our newest acquisition. A cultured voice announced through speakers that carried clearly in the night air. An 8-year-old from Hartford who was reported missing just this morning. Webb felt his training take over, pushing down the horror and focusing on tactical assessment. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and completely cut off from backup. But somewhere in those buildings, a child was about to die for the entertainment of paying customers. Agent Park was already moving, circling toward the rear of the compound. Morrison checked her weapon and headed for the generator station. Webb made for the broadcast cabin, knowing that every second of delay meant another moment of terror for whoever was inside. The cabin's windows had been covered with blackout material, but Webb could see light leaking around the edges. He pressed himself against the wall and listened to the voices inside. Remember, our viewers are paying premium rates for this exclusive live broadcast. The subject should remain conscious for as long as possible. Understood. Dr. Patterson has provided new pharmaceutical protocols that should extend the experience significantly. Dr. Patterson. Webb made a mental note of the name as he searched for an entry point. A child's voice, weak but defiant. My mom's going to find me. She's going to find me, and you're going to jail. Your mother thinks you ran away, sweetheart. That's what they all think. We're very good at making children disappear without anyone looking too hard. Webb found a rear window that had been left slightly ajar for ventilation. Through the gap, he could see into a room that had been set up like a medical examination area, complete with cameras, lighting, and an audience of screens showing faces watching from remote locations. The child strapped to the table couldn't have been more than 9 years old. Standing around her were 4 adults in medical scrubs, their faces obscured by surgical masks. But their voices were clear enough, and Webb recognized one of them immediately, Judge Harold Whitmore, whose name had been in Dr. Blackwood's customer ledger. Gentlemen, shall we begin? Whitmore said, picking up what looked like a medical instrument. Our audience has been very patient. Webb had seen enough. He keyed his radio, hoping Agent Park and Morrison could still receive. All units. We have an active situation. Child in immediate danger. Moving to intercede. He didn't wait for a response. The window slid up silently, and Webb dropped into the cabin just as the lights went out. Morrison had reached the generators. In the darkness, Webb could hear chairs overturning, people shouting orders, the child crying out in fear. He moved toward the sound of her voice, using his flashlight to disorient anyone who tried to stop him. Federal agents, he shouted, though it wasn't technically true. Everyone on the ground now. The response was immediate gunfire. Professional, coordinated, designed to pin him down while the primary targets escaped. Webb dove behind what felt like medical equipment, hearing bullets shatter glass and electronic components around him. But in the chaos, he could hear Agent Park's voice from the front of the cabin. FBI, drop your weapons. More gunfire, this time from multiple directions. Webb used the distraction to move toward the examination table, following the sound of the child's terrified breathing. It's okay, he whispered when he found her. I'm a police officer. I'm here to help. She was barely conscious, whatever drugs they'd given her making her movements sluggish. But she was alive, and that was what mattered. The restraints were medical grade, designed to prevent any possibility of escape. Webb worked frantically to unfasten them while gunfire continued around the cabin. As his flashlight swept across the table, he saw something that made his stomach lurch. A camera system was still recording, red lights indicating live broadcast to the remote audience. Somewhere, paying customers were watching this rescue attempt, probably frustrated that their entertainment was being interrupted. Webb found the camera controls and started smashing equipment with the butt of his gun. Screens went dark, broadcasting equipment sparked and died. But he could hear voices from the remaining speakers, the remote audience, angry about the disruption of their show. Get the backup location online. Switch to the secondary facility. This is costing us thousands. Secondary facility. Webb's blood ran cold. This wasn't the only location. The network had multiple sites, probably dozens of them, all broadcasting to the same customer base. The gunfire stopped suddenly, replaced by the sound of vehicles starting outside. The professionals were cutting their losses and evacuating, leaving behind equipment and evidence, but preserving their operational security. Agent Park's voice came through the darkness. Building secure. Suspects have fled. We need medical support immediately. Webb gathered the child in his arms. She couldn't have weighed more than 60 pounds, and carried her outside as Morrison restored power to the compound. In the harsh light of the restored generators, they could see the full scope of what they'd interrupted. Camp Wildwood had been converted into a professional broadcast facility capable of streaming live content to global audiences. Multiple cabins contained different sets, rooms designed to look like children's bedrooms, school classrooms, medical examination rooms, each equipped with professional cameras, lighting, and sound equipment. And in the administration building, they found the operational center, computers connected to servers around the world, customer databases with thousands of entries, financial records showing millions of dollars in transactions. Morrison was studying a wall-mounted monitor displaying what appeared to be a global map with dozens of active broadcast locations. Jesus Christ, Webb. This thing is international. Look at these locations: Thailand, Romania, Colombia, Philippines. They're broadcasting from everywhere. Agent Park had found the customer interface, a sophisticated website that allowed viewers to request specific scenarios, bid on exclusive access to particular children, and even customize the experience based on their preferences. The current active user count showed 847 people logged in and watching various broadcasts. 847 people, at this very moment, paying to watch children be tortured and murdered. We need to shut this down, Morrison said. All of it. Every location, every server, every customer. But Agent Park was shaking his head as he studied the system architecture. This is designed to be distributed and redundant. Shutting down this location probably triggered automatic failsafes that protected the rest of the network. By now, they've probably moved all critical operations to backup facilities. Webb's radio crackled with incoming traffic. Detective Webb, this is Connecticut State Police. We have FBI units en route to your location, ETA 10 minutes. Also, we're receiving reports of simultaneous raids being conducted by federal agencies in 12 states. This operation appears to be much larger than we initially understood. As if summoned by the radio call, helicopter rotors echoed through the valley. Federal response teams were converging on Camp Wildwood, but Webb suspected they would find mostly empty buildings and destroyed evidence. The child they'd rescued, her name was Emmett Shun, age 8, reported missing from Hartford 18 hours earlier, was airlifted to Connecticut Children's Medical Center. She would survive, physically. The psychological trauma would take years to address, but she was alive. As dawn broke over the smoldering remains of the compound, Webb found himself sitting on a fallen log, staring at a printout of the customer database. 847 active users. Thousands more in the historical records. Names, addresses, payment information, viewing preferences. Morrison sat down beside him. The FBI's cybercrime unit says they've identified over 300 locations worldwide that were part of this network. They're coordinating with international law enforcement to conduct simultaneous raids, but she trailed off. But most of them are probably already evacuated, Webb finished. The people running this have had 40 years to perfect their operational security. They know how to disappear. Agent Park approached with a tablet displaying financial records. We've traced some of the money flows. This network was generating over $50 million annually. That kind of revenue buys a lot of protection, a lot of redundancy, a lot of contingency planning. Webb studied the names in the customer database. Judges, politicians, entertainment executives, tech billionaires, foreign diplomats. People with the power to make investigations disappear, witnesses vanish, evidence get lost in bureaucratic black holes. How many do you think we'll actually be able to prosecute? Morrison asked. Agent Park consulted his tablet. Based on similar cases, maybe 10%. These people have resources to fight charges, connections to delay proceedings, lawyers who specialize in making evidence inadmissible. Webb felt the weight of 47 years of injustice settling on his shoulders. All those children, all those families who never got answers, all those predators who continued hunting because they were protected by money and power. But then he thought about Emmett Shawn, alive and safe in a hospital bed instead of dead in a basement chamber. He thought about the parents who would get to hold their children again, the families who would finally have closure. 10% is better than 0%, he said finally. Morrison's phone buzzed with a message from FBI headquarters. Preliminary count from global raids. 127 children rescued alive. 89 suspects in custody. 400+ terabytes of evidence seized. Investigation expanding to include financial crimes, international trafficking, government corruption. Estimated duration, 3 to 5 years for full prosecution. Webb looked up at the morning sky, watching news helicopters circle the compound like mechanical vultures. By noon, this story would be dominating every news cycle in the country. The scope of the network, the high-profile customers, the decades of cover-ups, it would be impossible to suppress. Some of the monsters would escape. Some of the evidence would disappear. Some of the powerful would use their connections to avoid consequences. But not all of them. For the first time in 47 years, the network that had started in Dr. Blackwood's basement was finally exposed to the light. 6 months later, Detective Marcus Webb stood in the empty basement of 412 Maple Street, which had been converted into a memorial for the victims of what the media had dubbed the Willowbrook Network. 47 names were etched into black granite, representing the children who had died in Dr. Blackwood's original operation. But they weren't the only names. The investigation had expanded far beyond anything Webb had imagined that first day when Sarah Chin's sledgehammer broke through the basement wall. International raids had uncovered evidence of over 2,000 victims across 5 decades, spanning 6 continents. The customer database had led to 347 arrests worldwide. 17 federal judges had been indicted. A former attorney general faced charges. 3 sitting congressmen had resigned rather than face prosecution. The Vatican was conducting its own internal investigation after 12 high-ranking officials were implicated. Agent Morrison had been promoted to lead the FBI's new International Child Exploitation Task Force. The personal cost had been enormous. Learning about her father's involvement had destroyed her relationship with her surviving family. But she'd channeled that pain into the most comprehensive anti-trafficking operation in law enforcement history. Webb had received offers from federal agencies, book publishers, movie producers. He'd turned them all down. Some stories were too important to profit from. Emma Chun had made a full recovery and returned to school. Her parents had moved to a different state, seeking anonymity and a fresh start. But they'd sent Webb a photo of her on her 9th birthday, smiling and surrounded by friends. Sometimes, that photo was the only thing that let him sleep at night. Mrs. Henderson had finally found peace. At 83, she'd testified before Congress about the culture of dismissal that had allowed the network to operate for so long. Her final words to the committee had been simple: listen to the children. Always listen to the children. The network itself had been severely damaged, but not completely destroyed. Federal estimates suggested that 60% of the global operation had been disrupted, with the remainder scattered and struggling to rebuild. New cases emerged regularly as investigators followed money trails and victim testimonies to previously unknown facilities. Webb's phone buzzed with a message from Agent Park, new lead from the Bangkok raids. Shipping records suggest another major facility in Ohio. Are you available for consultation? Webb looked around the memorial basement one more time, reading the names of children who had waited 36 years for justice. Then he headed for his car. The work wasn't finished. It might never be finished. But for 47 children who had died in darkness, and for Emma Chun who had lived to see another birthday, and for all the victims yet to be found, the work would continue. Some monsters were finally in cages. Others were still hunting. And Detective Marcus Webb would keep hunting them until he couldn't hunt anymore. The basement at 412 Maple Street was empty now, its secrets finally exposed to the light. But in basements and abandoned buildings around the world, the network that Dr. Blackwood had started was still operating, still claiming victims, still counting on silence and fear to protect them. That silence had been broken. The fear belonged to them now.